tonight for this very special online author talk. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wiradjuri people, the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So my name is Victoria. I am from the Bathurst Library. I'm very pleased to be able to kick off tonight's event and welcome you as you join us. Some of you may have heard me mention the chat box that should be on your screen somewhere. If you have questions for Heather, would like to tell us where you're joining from, what the weather's like, hello, send through greetings, by all means, please do. We love to hear from you. We love to engage with you. So please use that chat box. I've sent out a little shout out, so everyone should be, it should pop up somewhere on your screen for you to have a look at. So first off, I would just like to start and say thank you for registering and attending our online library events. In these days and ages, for most of the year, it's been quite different to all of us. It's not what we're used to, but these kind of events allow us to really continue to share our interests and our passions and remain connected, which is lovely. So thank you all so much for attending tonight. As it is an online event, myself and Heather, our author, we're coming together over some different internet connections. So if your sound or your audio drops out at all, please bear with us. Stay in the event as it usually comes back very quickly. So just keep that in mind. But my colleague Natalie is on the chat to help out with any of those tech issues. So please try and get in touch if you can, if you're having any kind of issues that keep happening or last a bit longer. But I think we might get straight into it. So our special guest tonight is best-selling author Heather Morris. New Zealand born originally, she now lives in Melbourne. Joining us from Brisbane tonight though. As such, she couldn't join us in person this time around, but hopefully with the release of future books, we might be able to get you back into Bathurst, Heather. So as well as being an author, Heather has extensive experience in social work and is also a screenwriter with apparently many screenplays sitting in the bottom of your desk, so I've read. So many of you would know Heather as the author of her first novel, The Tattooist of Auschwitz, which is an incredible book about hope, love and life, but in a terrible part of history. So tonight we're here to hear about Heather's third book that you have written this year, that was published this year, titled Stories of Hope. So Heather, welcome and hello.
Hello, thank you. And just as you said that, this fly flew right across in front of me. I don't know where the little sausage is gone, but I'll get him later. Look, thank you so much, Victoria, and it's such a pleasure to be here chatting to people in Bathurst. Yeah, I'm really bummed that I'm not there with you, trust me. My preference is always to be in a room with you, not sitting here on my own looking down this tiny little peephole and have a camera in my laptop. So thank you for putting yourselves out and having a chance to, well, let me chat to you through this medium.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited, and I know that a lot of our people joining us tonight, some of who are keen library users, are grateful to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you, Heather. So what we're going to do is we'll kick off with a couple of questions. If anyone has any questions, please send them through to the chat, and we'll get to those towards the end where Heather can answer those questions that you might have. But look, we'll start off. I've just finished reading Stories of Hope over the weekend, and it was a fantastic book to read, particularly after the kind of year that we've had, I think. So, yes. So Heather, the intro to the book, it's a bit of a musing on first the bushfires and then the rise of COVID-19 in Australia and the kind of impacts that these have had on our lives, the community and the wider world. Can you tell us a bit about how these events link into the premise of the book?
Well, funnily enough, Victoria, actually they don't. The book was written before the end of last year, or before the beginning of this year. It was only when the year went pear-shaped on us in about May, just before the book was to go to the printers, that I asked for permission to write that little introduction or in the beginning, because I felt that, it had been such a bummer of a year, and that was only up until May, or I think it was about May. And I wanted to acknowledge what life had been like here in Australia for us and mention the terrible bushfires that ravaged us early at the beginning of the year. And then for some parts of the East Coast, we were hit by floods. And not too long after that, of course, COVID came along. And then the Black Lives Matter movement came in the middle of all that. And of course, there's always the problem, and I call it a problem, of climate change and the effect that the weather is having on our lives. So I just took the liberty of writing a little introduction mentioning these things and how significant they were. And just maybe by reading about stories of hope, it may just help, even if it helped one person deal with this crap of a year we're having. Excuse my language. I promise to be better now.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I'm glad you did write it, because I do think it ties in very well to what you have to say in the following chapters. Can you take us through your thoughts as you were writing the book, or even before you were writing the book? What did you want it to be?
It was my publishers who asked me to write it. And the reason that they came up with this whole notion of writing a book about listening, and that's what it's about, folks who have no idea. It's about listening, and how as a young child I learned to listen by my great-grandfather. Now, the reason still why it came about, picture me sitting in a bar in a dingy little hotel in Košice in Slovakia with my publisher. We were there when I was researching Thilke's story so I could write that. And I spent the day in the apartment right next door to where Silke and her husband had lived for over 40 years. And their neighbors, they were 93 and 96 years of age, and they had known Silke and her husband since the day that those two couples moved into these apartments. Now, Slovakia is not like Australia here, where we live at home with our folks and then we might go and get an apartment or share with somebody else. And anyway, we upsize, upsize all our lives constantly. Not so in Slovakia. You get given an apartment, more than likely an apartment. If you're higher up in the bureaucracy, you might get a home. And that's really yours for life. That turned out to be brilliant for me, because when I was needing to research Silke's story, my friends in Lali's hometown of Kompaki, it's about an hour away, they found the apartment where Silke had lived. And by going there, they found people, friends and neighbors who had known her for decades. This is my long-winded way of getting back to that bar in a seedy part of Košice. This particular day, I had sat in this apartment next door with these elderly people and many, many others who came in and out of that apartment all day, sharing their stories of Silke. And my publisher was there and two translators. And in that bar on about our third port, I think we'd stopped with the coffee, she said to me how amazed she had been by how I had connected to these people. So people came in and out all day from the apartments. Sometimes there was half a dozen people there, sometimes as many as 20. They're all talking at once and they're all telling and sharing stories of Silke. My translators are taking it all down, asking my questions and feeding only a little bit back to me. And Margaret said, she said, you didn't speak Slovakian other than to say Ďakujem, which is thank you. They didn't speak any English, and yet you were connected to them, utterly connected, and they were opening up. She said, how do you do that? The few times she tried to ask a question, these people kind of looked at her and then just turned back to me and ignored her. I said, I was lucky to grow up with a great-grandfather who lived 2 paddocks away. And as a young girl, he kind of took me under his wing. And I admit all this in the book, and I share with you a little bit about my childhood. How I was the only daughter with 4 brothers, how there was no talking or listening going on in my own home. More often than not, it was my mother yelling at one of my 4 brothers and me just wanting to disappear. But this beautiful old man who lived 2 paddocks away, or actual orchards away, I would stop off and see every afternoon. And he, in his 80s at this stage, well, I think he got to that same point in life that Lali did, and that he wanted to tell somebody about his life. And he found in me somebody prepared to listen, even though I was a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. And I never recalled any other adults really listening to Gramps the way I would sit every afternoon. And he opened up and he taught me not only what he'd done, but he taught me that the only way you will ever learn anything, and particularly ever remember anything, is by just listening and really listening. So not only did I listen to him, which was most of the time, but he also listened to me. And he would then tell me, well, you know, you've paused there. I'm going to just say nothing more and see if you've got anything else to say. So this, you know, he was wise beyond his education and his upbringing. But not only did he teach me about listening to him and being listened to, he taught me about listening to the world that we lived in, which was very small. Rural New Zealand, where I grew up, it wasn't even a town. The place had the school with 2 classrooms I went to, a pub, of course it had to have a pub, and a general store. And the people in the surrounding area were all dairy farmers. But sitting with him, and when he'd say some days, we're just going to listen to the world. And by that he meant we were going to listen to the sound of the dogs that were out there bringing the cows in to be milked. And after a while he would say to me when we heard a dog bark, which dog is that? Listen, and you'll work out which dog it is. And then it was listen to the sound of the farm machinery we could hear coming up down the street from neighbours. All these things that he taught me how to listen to, not the white noise that we live with every day, but to listen more often than not to the sound of my mother yelling at one of my brothers, but to listen. And she just said, we've got to write a book about that, about the art of listening, because folks, that's how I got Lali's story. And that is how I was able to tell you about Silka, because she had witnessed me sitting in this apartment this day listening to these people who didn't speak any English. That's where it came from, all right? From a bar.
Where all good stories start, surely.
Too many ports.
So that's really interesting, yeah. So can you tell us a bit about, and forgive me if I pronounce these names wrong, but Lali and Geeta and Silka, and what they were like in person and what the experience of listening to them gave you or taught you?
Look, I'd love to, because here's the thing, folks. The book now, Lali's story, has been out now coming up to 3 years. And when I do talk to folks like you, face to face, when you get a chance to put your hand up and ask a question, please ask questions. I love your questions. But people were saying to me, look, we've read the book. We actually don't want you to talk about the book anymore. We know it. And yet they still turned out to hear me. So I started saying, well, would you like to hear about my relationship with Lali and he and I in the 3 years? And people seem to have a real thirst for wanting to know about that. And so I started talking about that. And look, 3 years of the most amazing time with this man in my life and in my family's life. And so in the book, I get to now tell the readers who've read the book, who don't have access to hear me jabbering on like I am here, what Lali was like as a man. I call him a cheeky, charming old bastard. And he loved being referred to that way because he was so charming to males, females, even animals. He had a cheekiness about him which was beautifully naive and innocent in a lot of ways. Sometimes he could be almost a little childlike with this cheeky grin, which he would have. And he had a way when he never liked something I said or he didn't agree with it, he could roll his eyes like nobody else I ever knew. So being able to tell people now in word and print in the book about him and my time together is, what gave me that opportunity to do that. So there was another reason for writing Stories of Hope. And you're wondering, well, how does the title Stories of Hope tie into listening? Well, more often than not, when you do hear something like Lali's story and about Silka's story, behind those stories of tragedy and trauma, there is always hope. There's hope for them in surviving and while they're living them. There's hope that they may be able to share their stories and make a difference. And that tied in totally with all these amazing thousands of people who have written to me over the last 2.5 years, sharing their story of hope, of how some tragedy has affected them. And they've read Lali's book and they just say to themselves, I'm going to take inspiration and hope from his survival in dealing with what I'm confronted.
Yeah. And without giving away too much of the book, of course, there was a part that really struck me, is when you went with Lali to a function at the Jewish Holocaust Centre in Melbourne, and you met a lot of women and a lot of men who wanted to talk to you and tell their stories. So I suppose how did this make you feel? But also, um, did you take many people up on this, or do you have the time to take many people up? Because I can imagine that you've been approached quite a lot with these kind of opportunities.
Yeah, that's a bit of an understatement. But back then, of course, I hadn't been. And that was what the wonderful thing was. And in fact, Lully and I walked into this room. There was a good 200 people in it. They were all his sort of friends and contemporary, the majority of whom were survivors or married to a survivor. So all in his age sort of group. And he walked in there. He and I be the last ones to arrive. This is the first time he went out and connected with the Jewish community in Melbourne after Gita had died, because he'd withdrawn from them. And he asked me to come with him. I went, certainly, not knowing what to expect. What I did not expect was for him to walk through the door with me, stand there, and as people turned and saw him and called out his name, well, he bowed like an actor on a stage who had just completed this fine performance. And then he pointed to me and he just said, "Oh, she's my girlfriend. Ladies, you look after her. I pick her up on the way out." And just pushed me over to go and join the ladies, because the men were on one side of the room and the ladies were on the other. And it was marvelous, because now I got to meet these people who'd heard about me. Trust me, the Jewish rumour mill with regard to Lully and this non-Jewish lady from New Zealand who was going to tell his story, it had circulated well and truly around the community. And yes, these ladies were bombarding me with, well, the beautiful things about Gita. So while it was one thing to hear all about her, of course, from Lully, let's face it, he was biased, but they weren't. But still, I got to hear about her from them. And yes, you're quite right. They started saying, "I have a story. Can you tell my story too?" And I met many of those people many times over the next 2.5 years while Lully was alive. And many of their stories, I sort of said, "Well, can I incorporate a little bit of your story into something?" Because not every one of them had a story that was, novel size. Yes, they had amazing, horrific experiences. But here's the great thing. They too had reached an age where they now wanted to talk to someone. And here's the other thing about talking to me. Even they admitted, "I could not talk like this to my children. I cannot look at my children and tell them about these horrible things that I saw." But there was safety in talking to a stranger, even though I didn't become a stranger for long. There was that level of safety. And Lully had obviously got the word out that I do not judge.
So it ties back into those things that you learned about listening from your childhood, from an early age.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it couldn't have been easy for Lali, or indeed any of those people, to recount some of the things that they had experienced. And I imagine it wouldn't have been easy for yourself to hear those things as well, which you talk about a little bit in the book. So how did you manage that aspect of listening?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt Lully took to his grave many of the horrific, evil things that he saw or was even part of. And there are also many that I do not share with you. They are not in the book, and I will not share with anyone talking, because to me, they were between him and I. And to get that level of trust where he would tell me something and say, can you not write that? And this is why it's not a memoir or a documentary, because, there's kind of rules about them that if you know something, you're meant to reveal it. And I did not want to do that. I needed him to know that I would hold his confidences when he said to me, "Don't write about that," that he could trust me to tell his story. I mean, that's just so important to me. But yes, of course, hearing the kind of stuff that he saw and it was part of, it's tough, guys, it's really tough. And there was a period when I got totally overwhelmed by it, and I found I didn't want to go and see him. I couldn't carry anymore. And my family were worrying about me. I would come home, and they had met him, and he was now part of their lives. And they'd come home and go, "How's Lully? How's Lully?" They were young adult children and husband. And I switched from saying, "Oh, look, he's fantastic. And today we talked about," and we took the dogs for a walk. And all of a sudden I was just saying, "He's fine." And they'd ask anymore, and I go, "Look, he's fine, okay?" and I wouldn't go on anymore. Well, a colleague of mine, where I worked in the social work department at Monash Medical Centre, I told her one day that I was struggling. And she kind of smacked me around the head and said, oh, for goodness sake, it's a classic case of transference, Heather. You know the deal. You have no right to his pain and his trauma. No right at all. You don't get to own any part of it. And if you want to get his story and help him, then find a way to deal with it. And she was quite right. I just needed that reminder. And then I had to find a strategy of how I could listen to him and not take on the pain that I was seeing and feeling from him. And yeah, I did. I found my way, which was simply to not leave him and go straight home to my family, but to drive around into a quiet street and just sit in my car and center myself, get myself onto that keel where I could go home and be the wife and mother that my family expected me to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've obviously applied that same kind of strategy to hearing about Silke's story and the other personal stories that you've heard going into your next project.
Yeah, absolutely. But here's the difference. With Lully's, when I did get snowed under with, because he was telling me things and I started researching them as well, wanting to confirm it. And the things I was confirming he said, I learnt that he was in fact downplaying them. That the circumstances and the conditions under which he'd lived in Auschwitz-Birkenau were way, way worse than what he was telling me. And that could become really, really upsetting to think, oh my God, this man, this living history I'm spending time with, look what he in fact endured, and he's downplaying it to me. But I could go to him and say to him, you didn't tell me this, and it's way worse. And he would say, I know, but I'm here. I survived, I'm here. And he would give me a hug. And that made it all better. And I didn't have that with Silke. And when my researchers in Moscow sent me the material, the photos, the testimonies, the documents that they uncovered from the gulag she was in, well, I had nobody that I could go to for that kind of support. So I yelled at the husband and the dog a lot, okay? It worked.
All kinds of coping strategies, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
And Heather, you just spoke about the researchers that you have helping you. How long does it take yourself and these researchers to gather enough materials for these kind of books?
Well, with Lully's story, we were getting a lot of research, and of course, something like 80% of the documents out of Auschwitz were destroyed. And so it's impossible to be able to verify everything. And so we're getting as much verification as we can. And then I was finding that there'd be some slight discrepancies in it. And then I wasn't getting confirmation of things. And it was starting to sort of weigh me down. Because you have to remember, folks, I'd never written a story before. This is my first. I didn't know how to go about it. And I was writing it as a screenplay. And then I woke up one morning and I went, oh, sod it. I'm not telling the story of the Holocaust. I'm just telling a Holocaust story, Lully's story. And if his memory and history did not always walk side by side, then to me it no longer mattered. It's his memory I was going to honor. And once I beat myself up, I felt liberated to tell his story as per his memory. And here's the thing too that I subsequently found out when I was giving a talk in a synagogue in Sydney, and the rabbi was introducing me, and he said to the folks there, did you know that in Hebrew there is no word for history? All our stories must come from the memories of those people who lived them. I went, yes. Storytelling is what has made the world go round since Adam and Eve. And that is why it should be remembered. Academics, historians, fantastic, love them, thank them for being there. But let's stick to the stories of the people who were there.
Very interesting, and I find kind of beautiful words, I think.
Doesn't always gel with the academics and the historians, can I tell you? That's another story.
They're a particular kind. And Heather, you described towards the end of the book the feeling of often feeling quite humbled. Can you elaborate on that for us a bit?
Oh, I still am. I am humbled every time you folks turn up and switch on your computer to watch me, and I struggle to understand why you do it. The people I meet, the places I've been, and how my world, and it has changed incredibly. You know, I was going to retire at 65, and instead I turned 65 and I had a book come out. And in the last, as I say, nearly 3 years, my world did not go down that path of retirement, as my husband pointed out to me. This was not how we planned it, but hey, way better as it is. And I struggle to process the fact that so many people have bought and read the book. I actually don't think about it. I just go, oh, you're kidding. Whenever my publishers send me updates, because something like 6 million copies have been sold. And there's a bit of a formula that says that for every one sold, anything up to 3 to 4 extra people will read it. So do the maths, and you kind of go, no, can't process that. That's too much. And you know, that actually ties back to the whole thing about the Holocaust too. And it's interesting, that word 6 million, and I've just thought of it now, thinking about it, how Lali's story and why it resonates with people. Because 6 million is the figure that the academics and the historians use to describe the number of Jewish people who were murdered. And there's no other word for it, folks. They were murdered during the Holocaust, 6 million. And I was talking to a group of students, young American students, a few months after the book had come out in the UK and in Australia, but it wasn't out in the United States yet. And I was in Krakow in Poland with this group of all these students that gather every year for an event called March to the Living. It's when the 16, 17-year-old Jewish students from all around the world gather to learn about the Holocaust. And some Americans that were there heard about me in my book and asked me to talk to these students. And we spent the whole day at Auschwitz-Birkenau, my first time there. I never went there until after the book was published, because I needed to describe it to you through the eyes of Lali, not my eyes, 60 years later. And I had dinner with these 300 odd students, and I said, oh, would you talk to them after? And I looked at these kids. They were still traumatized hours later from what they had seen and heard and been told by official guides at Auschwitz-Birkenau. I said, they don't want to listen to me. And they said, well, look, we don't know anything about your book because it's not out in America. Just say something about Lali. So they had to be sent out and sit outside on the grass in this little community centre in Krakow. And I stood on the step leading into it. And I spoke for 5 or 10 minutes, and I just said, look, any of you got any questions? And then the questions started coming. And it was nearly 2 hours later, getting close to 11 o'clock at night, when one of their teachers or one of their rabbis came up and said, look, we have to stop this. These kids need to get back to the hotel and go to bed. And I went, absolutely. So I got back to my hotel room, and there's a knock on the door. It was about midnight. And it was one of the gentlemen from the Australian group. And he said, oh, look, there's some of the Americans want to talk to you. They're downstairs in this room. Can I take you to them? Yeah, there were the teachers and the rabbis and the counselors that are with them. And I went, nothing ever good came from me being asked to go and talk to teachers, either as a student myself or for any of my 3 kids. So with a lot of apprehension, I went down into this room, and these people said to me, they couldn't understand why these kids would sit there for so long and engage with me for these nearly 2 hours. And they grabbed about a dozen of them when they got back to the hotel, took them into the room, and they said, what did we just see? What the heck happened out there? And they apparently looked at these adults, they said, as if we were stupid. And then they just kind of looked at each other and went, we heard all day long about how 6 million of us died during the Holocaust. You took us to the concentration camp, to Birkenau, showed us the ovens where 1.5 million of us died. She spoke about one man, and we could relate to that. So that's what it comes back to with me too, in terms of not being able to process a lot of what goes on in my life. I can relate to being here right now with you, Victoria, and talking to Pauline and Patty and Sarah. Natalie's out there, Patu, and I think there are other names, but I can't see you. I cannot relate to these other numbers. And somebody sent me from America, actually, not too long ago, an article that was in a little paper there. I'm not going on about stories so much, am I? But never mind, let's go.
All very interesting.
Yeah, there was an article that had been written, and he found it, and he'd seen it, and he found it in a paper been written years ago somewhere in the US. And a Jewish man apparently had struggled with the concept of 6 million of anything, let alone 6 million Jewish people perishing in the Holocaust. And he wanted to see what 6 million of something looked like. And he started buying paper clips. And he started building a mountain in his lounge room of paper clips. Apparently his wife left him. She couldn't handle the paper clips anymore. I am told she subsequently came back. But he just gathered over the course of a couple of years 6 million paper clips because he counted them. And when he had them all there, he said he looked at it and it meant nothing to him. So he reached in and he took out one and he looked at it and he said, you're the paper clip. You're the one that matters. So to me, it was a nice way to be able to tell the stories of the one, because they're the ones that matter. And I will continue to do that. Even though I'm telling the story of 3 next time.
Well, yes, going on to that, you said that you visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, but you also visited, in the process of researching for your next book, Israel. What was your time like there?
Well, I think this is how crazy it is that stories can come to me, and many, many stories have come to me, and I'll go on about my website soon. But last June, I was in South Africa. I was there at a book festival in this beautiful little town called Franschhoek. It's the wine region of South Africa, and some very nice wines they make there too. And I got back to the hotel room, it was about 1 or 2 in the morning. I know it was late, but I wasn't tired, which kind of tells me I didn't drink enough. But I decided to have a look at my emails. Then I opened up my computer and I read one email. It was written to me by a man who lives in Toronto in Canada. And he wrote telling me that 2 days earlier, he had picked up my book at Toronto Airport on his way to visit his mum, who lives in Tel Aviv. Now, the good thing here is that this story only exists because Canada, along with Brazil, are the only other countries in the world that have the same cover as we do here in Australia. 55 countries. Canada and Brazil took the Australian one. The others are all different. Well, his mum, he got up the next morning and he left the copy of the book on his mum's coffee table. His mum walked past, looked at the cover and just said to him, "That must be about Lali and Gita." And she knew that because she looked at the number on the cover of the book on Gita's arm. And she then looked at the number on her own arm. It was 3 away from that number on the cover. And she knew that her sister Sibby's was 2 away. And so her son wrote telling me this. And I wrote back, and within about 48 hours, lots of emails had exchanged. I get to Cape Town and I get a request to ring and speak to her. So I did. And I was sending the information she's telling me and emailing me onto my publishers in London saying, I'm hearing these amazing stories. And then I got to Johannesburg a couple of days later and I was about to fly home the next day and my publisher rang me in London and said, "How's it going?" I said, "Yeah, great. I'm heading home tomorrow." And she said, "No, you're not. We're rerouting you from Johannesburg to Tel Aviv." And I remember saying, "But Kate, I can't go." She said, "Why?" I said, "I've run out of clean knickers. You know, I timed it to go home tomorrow." Well, she pointed out to me that I could either go shopping or I could learn how to wash them. And yes, 24 hours later, I stepped off a plane in Tel Aviv. And yeah, that was a bit of a, oh my goodness, where am I? What am I doing here? I don't speak the language. I don't have any money. I don't have anything. And it was like 6 o'clock in the morning. But about 2 hours later, I knocked on the apartment door of Livia. And I spent a week there with her and her family, and her sister Magda and her family. Her older sister Sibby, she died a couple of years ago, but I met her 2 sons and their partners and adult grandchildren. And the story, which is titled 3 Sisters, you can read in October next year. These 3 sisters, 15, 17, and 19, from the same town as Gita, on the same train. 2 of them were on the same train going to Auschwitz with Gita. Remembered Lali, numbering them, he called it, by the way. He didn't call it tattooing. I made the numbers, he said. Their survival, and no, it's just not another Holocaust story, and I want to get that out there so that you're just not thinking that's where I'm going again. I am and I aren't. Some of the things that I've now learned, because I spent another week back there in January with them before COVID, hit us all. I didn't know that, but I'd arranged to go there. And some of the things that these three sisters, because the other sister ultimately ended up there as well, and how they could connect when, as I said, millions of people went through that place, and that these two sisters found out that their other sister had been brought in, and how they got her to be with them. Some of the things they saw and did, never been seen, written, we can find anywhere. Olivia, the young one, the little one, they called her Kitten, she was the 15-year-old. She had been, had the job as a messenger, which meant she was running all over Birkenau, delivering messages from one SS person to another. So seeing the camp, everything going on. But that's not their story. That's only part of it. The three sisters were marched out on a death march in January 1945, nearly 3 years later. A death march where thousands perished. The winter in Poland's are brutal. They decided, the three of them and a handful of other girls, rather be shot in the back and spent another day with the Nazis controlling their lives, and they ran. So I will tell you about their journey over the next 4 weeks, these girls, as they navigated their way through Poland and Germany to reach the Allies, of the Russians that threatened them, of the Germans that kept coming across, all these amazing stories. But that didn't end there either. They did get back to Slovakia, only to find themselves still outcast and not wanted. So what do these young girls do? Well, they banded together with several other, there's only a handful of Holocaust survivors made it back to Slovakia. And they met up with a couple of other young men who had not been Holocaust survivors, but they were Jewish young boys or young men who had joined the partisans and fought with the Russians. So they all got together and they went out into the forest in Czechoslovakia. And for 3 months, they trained how to use a weapon, a gun, how to drive a truck, how to be self-sufficient, how to live off the land. And then 3 months later, they made their way through Slovakia, communist-controlled Slovakia, through Romania, communist-controlled Romania, to the Black Sea. And there they boarded a boat, each with a gun in their pocket, and they sailed for Haifa. Now, this is in the time when Palestine and Israel were going through that incredible separation. Well, it wasn't even a separation. And again, I make no judgment. I will not comment on what happened when Palestine was taken away from the Palestinians and the state of Israel was created. But these three girls were there then. They were part of those founding people who created the country that we now know as Israel. And to tell it through their eyes, not of the bureaucrats and the soldiers and the military and the politicians, not through the eyes of the academics and the historians, but through the eyes of three young girls. And yeah, 2 of them are still alive. They're 94 and they're 96. I talked to them. Even lovely Livia, she's a 94-year-old and she speaks way better English than Magda. And I get a message from her daughter saying, you know, the M, their parents, that they call their mother, the word is M for her. She wants to talk to you. And so we'll set up a time and M will get on at the phone like this and we'll do WhatsApp video and she talks away for hours. And it's, yeah, 3 sisters, folks, coming to you next year. Incredible story of survival.
Absolutely. Just hearing you describe it now, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to hear that from them directly. So very much looking forward to that one. Can I ask, Heather, Tattooist of Auschwitz and Silke's Journey and now the 3 sisters, they're all based on people's memories and recollections and their stories.
Yeah.
Do you think that into the future books that you'll write, because I'm sure there's many, many more in you, do you think that you're going to seek out different kind of stories and do the similar kind of thing with those? Or is this just something that might be inevitable? Someone needs to tell the story and it's going to be you.
Look, in terms of stories like this, I consider these 3 books the sisters Silka and Nadi to be a trilogy which will end my telling stories along these lines.
Mm.
I will never give up telling stories of ordinary people who lived through extraordinary times. And once again, the number of people who have contacted me and my publishers saying, can you tell my story? And we're talking about more contemporary times too, and other events. Not all sort of genocides and holocausts, but just some amazing storylines of which we have many. Way too many have come to me than I can possibly write. But the wonderful thing is that I have amazing publishers who see the merit in these stories being told, and together with the person who was the owner of those stories, well, ghostwriters are now have come on board and are helping those stories still get told. And yeah, it's just through them having reached out to me, and I share them with my publishers and they go, we want to tell that story. We want that story told. Mm-hmm. It's not a matter of them wanting to, you know, have a commercial success and make money out of these other stories. They are very picky, trust me. They're all stories of merit and stories that must be told.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very good to hear. So you've told us a bit about your next novel, which is fantastic. How has, going back to a bit more modern times, how has COVID impacted you as a writer?
You know, I didn't think it would. And I think my publishers initially said, oh, well, you're in lockdown now because you're in Melbourne for 17 weeks. We never left home virtually. Until you live under a curfew, guys. We were under curfew from 8 p.m. at night to 5 a.m. in the morning. You couldn't leave your home. I had a 5-kilometre radius only that I was allowed to travel in. And then I couldn't go and visit anybody anyway. So what was the point of it? Because you weren't allowed. And they thought, well, you'll have no excuse for not, you know, just knuckling down and writing this next book. And as much as I'm desperate to tell the story, and I am telling it, funnily enough, I didn't appreciate that there was a psychological effect on me from being told that I was in a curfew, that around me people were dying in Melbourne and around the world even more so. That there in fact there was a psychological impact on my ability to sit down each day and spend 8 hours in front of a computer. I struggled to do it. Mm. So all the time in the world, and I couldn't do it because, yeah, my life, like all of yours and everyone else's, is turned upside down. And you've got to grapple with that. You've got to try and process it. And when you can't, you kind of go, yeah, shut down.
Yeah, it's a challenging time, I think. Luckily, Melbourne is out of lockdown and doing very well. Almost a month now, I believe, without any cases.
More than a month. We know exactly 33 days today.
There you go.
We know exactly.
Progress.
That's the impact, by the way, folks, it has on you. And I'm not sure that other people in Australia can appreciate the impact of that kind of lockdown. We all had it, I know. But there was something very different about Melbourne's because it kept going on and on and on. And we just could not see light at the end of the tunnel here for a while. And I suspect that the mental health industry will be sorting this out for a long time.
Absolutely. So if anyone in the audience has any questions for Heather, please feel free to send them through to the chat. We'll move to those very quickly if you send them through. Heather, something that I always like to ask authors is, do you read the kind of books that you write?
Oh, yes, I do actually, which is why I gravitated to Lovely Story anyway. The person who's writing, I can say inspired me, but there's no way that I can come anywhere near her writing, and that's the amazing Hilary Mantel, the British author, the Booker Prize winner of times 2. And her style of writing, just an awe of. I love memoirs, funnily enough, even though I refused to write lullies. I was told I should have, and I refused to do that. But I love reading them myself. And I'm really cranky that Barack Obama has had so much to say that his book is so damn thick, I can't read it. Well, I should read it, but you get sort of a sore arm holding it. You know, why couldn't he have made one the same size as Michelle's? So I love reading more contemporary sort of memoirs, of course, about people right now hey, look, I've been around a while, so, you know, these people are in my life. I can read Nelson Mandela's memoir and stories about him and relate to them because I lived them. Not like him, but I lived that period.
And what are you reading now?
I am, well, actually the one I stopped to read yesterday, but here's the other thing I really enjoy for relaxation. David Baldacci, John Grisham, Michael Connolly, Lee Child. That's what I read. I read a lot of. But yesterday, well, he's a publisher in the UK. In fact, he's the man who first found out about the Tattooist and offered me that publishing deal that I took. He no longer is with the company that he was part of when I joined him. But he's still very much in my life because he's gone off and got another publishing company that he started. But anyway, he sent me, which he's done a couple of times now, and I will never say no to him because he's the person I owe everything to. And yesterday I got an email from him, and after all the nice and pleasantries, I could see there was an attachment there. And sure enough, from Mark, there's a manuscript that he's wanting me to read and provide a comment for when it gets published in the middle of the year. But I do read quite a few unpublished books, and very privileged to do that.
Yeah, fantastic.
This one's called The Book of Lost Words, and I'm about 180 pages into it. And brilliant, love it.
Keep an eye out for that one, I think. And Heather, have I heard rumours or have I seen something somewhere saying that there might be a movie or something like that to do with one of your books?
Well, not a movie, but Lully's story is being made into a 6-part miniseries. And last Friday night, I had a lovely 2-hour Zoom meeting with the producers involved. You're in the UK, so it's a UK production. Well, it's a UK major production, but it's also got about 5 other countries all involved in it. And yeah, 6 parts, 6 hours, which, by the way, folks, is the equivalent to 3 feature films, full-length feature films. But pretty delighted, and we got held up, like all productions, with COVID. But part of my chat on Friday was, because I'm a script consultant, so I've got to approve everything, which I insisted on. And part of the conversation now is, well, okay, a lot of production companies, we're now looking for COVID-safe ways to do things. And Poland and Hungary have both offered their countries to film these stories because they've got the landscape that we need. And given that Poland hasn't often let films be made there about the Holocaust, you know, it's happened on their land, they're pretty touchy about it. But now we're working out COVID-safe ways of taking crews and cast and you know, putting a bubble around them, really. But as they pointed out to me for Lully's story, they need a minimum of 300 extras every day, not including the main cast and the crews. So it's a big deal. But yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
How exciting. And I can imagine that being able to have that control over the script would be something important to you. Absolutely. After your relationship with Lully, yeah.
Yeah, but look, I insisted on it, and it was a matter of going with a production company that would accept that condition. There were many offers to make it into just like a 2-hour feature film, but the miniseries and these particular producers, or you know, ex-BBC producers, they've been making wonderful drama for many years, and they said, well, of course we want you involved. I mean, how can we be truthful? And we will veer away, and they have a few times, and I've had to pull them back because they're creatives in a different way. But yes, to them, they've got to honour the story too.
Yeah. When you mentioned just then that Poland can be a little bit touchy about I've forgotten the phrase you used, but filming in Poland. Does that apply to books written as well, or have you had any of that kind of feedback or such things from Poland about yours? Look at this thing.
You cannot, they've allowed documentaries and TV interviews to happen in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And I in fact have been there with film crews who are wanting to do a story about me in the book, you know, from both Poland, from Slovakia, from Spain, from the UK. So I've gone there with just a small film crew who are doing a story because there's no commercial exploitation involved. in a documentary or in a television sort of interview thing. And I agree entirely with them that to film there for commercial purposes is totally inappropriate. And we're not going to be filming in Auschwitz-Birkenau. But here's the thing about Poland. They flew me there about 18 months ago into their country and gave me an award on live national television because of what the Tattooist of Auschwitz has done to that country in terms of making the story so readable and relatable to people. In the country of Poland, where apparently some 5,000 people only identify as Jewish, 5,000. 500,000 copies of the book have been sold. So there's a little bit of an about in terms of, well, some good can come if the story is told in the right way. And as I say, for me, I just, when I'm being interviewed there, and I'm in a lot of television and radio there, I go, look, we all appreciate you're under occupation. This was not a Polish Holocaust. You did not perpetrate this. But they're still very touchy about it. But hey, I'm very, very welcome there, and I go there as often as I can.
That's fantastic and very interesting to hear, you know, about the amount of copies sold and what it might have done. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that I've probably asked you enough questions. We'll see if anyone from the audience has any questions. Nothing's been sent through just yet.
Look, I'll just quickly give a quick wrap on Stories of Hope.
Yes, please.
What I give you in there is some information about me, some personal information about me, because I decided I had to suck it up and find a level of courage to share with people a little bit about me, given how many people have written to me and shared about themselves. And so there was that element to it. There was the notion that every time I seemed to speak in front of people where you're face to face with me, that people would come and talk to me afterwards. And the sheer numbers that used the phrase to me, I regret that I did not talk more to my mother, my father, my uncle, my grandparent, my sibling. I regret that I had to learn about somebody so dear and close to me and my family at their funeral. And I wish I had have taken the time, or I knew how to talk to them. So in Stories of Hope, part of the stories I talk to you about is also some little tips and hints on how you too can listen to a family member. If you think you've got someone in your life who's been there for decades and you've been in and out of their house all your life and you've seen a picture on the wall, a photo, a trinket on a mantelpiece, why don't you go over to them and just perhaps, not when there's a crowd around, pick it up and ask them, remember where you bought this? Do you remember who you were with? Is there something significant about it? Because you can bet there is. I know that everything that I have on public display, it's actually not there in my home for people to come and to see. It's there because it connects with me. And I have a story about it. And that is a good way to get somebody else to talk to you, to show interest in somebody, because you will be rewarded if you put yourself out there and let a friend or a family member know that they can trust you to talk to them. I'm not talking about conversations. Conversations are great. 99% of our life is about conversation. Somebody says something, your brain immediately engages. How can I respond? What is going to be my answer to what they're saying? Have I something similar to add to it? But when you listen, you are not listening to do that. In fact, you are shutting up and listening so that you only hear what's being said and you have no role in adding to it. So that's what I'm trying to just get across in Stories of Hope. Listening to your elders, listening to your children, and listening to yourself. The importance of listening to your own head, heart, and body. And yeah, my head says things to me that I wish it didn't. My heart says things to me which I'm very happy to hear it say. My body is telling me all the time, get off your bum and move more. You sit down too much, and I possibly should listen to it more. So that's what Stories of Hope is about, listening and finding those stories of hope.
Yeah, and I love how in Stories of Hope, you emphasize the need to not only listen to the elders but children as well. I thought that was really good and very insightful, because they do have a different way of looking at things, don't they?
Yeah, and if your children, when they're little, are telling you something and you're busy and you just go, oh, yeah, it's just something little. It's just something little. Well, here's the thing. If you react like that when they're little, when they grow up, and you need them to tell you what's going on in their lives, they're teenagers, you want to know, well, why should they? Because when they told you something when they were little and you thought it was little, it was actually big to them. And you have not given them the permission to continue to tell you things, because you've not treated those little things with the respect. You're not going to do it every day of the week. You mums out there with little kids, trust me, you're not. But find the time every now and then to do it.
Well, I think that our audience is busy processing on all the stories that you've told us tonight, Heather. Did you want to mention your website?
I do. And it ties into the book. It's called Your Stories of Hope. And here we invite you to not only go and read some of the stories that are on it, but we invite people who have a story of hope, something that is really, really close to them, something that's happened that it's either could be really tragic or could be wonderful. And from that, you have learnt to move forward with hope. And we say, if you want to write about that, then do so and submit it. It will go to my publishers in London. I too will see it. And my publishers will contact you and say to you, this is a brilliant story. Do you want to do something more with it? We will offer you editorial assistance to write this up better. If you want to enter it into a short story competition, or into a book of a companion of short stories, if you want to do something with it. If you want to give us permission, we'll put it on the website for just people to read there. But yeah, it's I'm so delighted that the hundreds and hundreds of stories of hope that have been submitted to us. And for many, it's just cathartic for them to write the words, and that's enough. That's all we can hope and ask for too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Heather. That's fantastic. All right, so I can't see any questions that have come through for you. So I think we'll wrap it up. So thank you, Heather. Thank you so much. Big thank you. I think it's very special for you to be able to connect with us tonight, and we very much appreciate it. And we can't wait to see what you do next.
Three sisters, folks. Remember these names: Livia, Magda, Libby.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have you in Bathurst for that next one. Maybe, fingers crossed. So copies of Stories of Hope can be bought from our local bookseller, Books Plus. The library does also have some copies, but the Books Plus folks are very friendly as well. So thank you once again to everyone who has attended tonight. Thank you again to Heather.